So we will start off this segment by first looking at these four pictures. So we have four different pictures up here. All right, and what I want you to do is I'm actually going to have you pause this here for a little bit, and I want you to look at these and see if you can tell me what these four pictures all have in common. Okay, so what these four pictures all have in common, which you may or may not have guessed, is that they are all different types of cells in the body. This one up here, this black and white one, is actually a neuron or a nerve cell. This one here they are osteocytes or bone cells. The one down here in the lower right are sperm cells, and the one here in the lower left are skeletal muscle cells. Actually, no, I'm sorry, they are cardiac muscle cells. Sorry, I missed a characteristic here. So cells are actually very important to our bodies, and we will actually see how they kind of fit into the overall structure. But what we actually want to look at here with the cell is the cell cycle, because no matter what type of cell that we have, and we have almost 400 different types of cells in our body, each of them in some way, shape, or form go through the cell cycle, which does relate to cancer. And one of the reasons why we want to talk about cancer at this point is because cancer is actually a universal disease. It actually can hit any of our systems within our body. So rather than discussing it specifically within the different systems, I want to talk about it now, and that way then as we go through the different systems, we know that cancer is one of the diseases that we could be discussing, but we understand that it can apply to any of the systems. So before we can actually talk about cancer, we need to review a little bit about the cell cycle. Remember that in the cell cycle we have three stages. We have interphase, mitosis, and cytokinesis. And this cell cycle is what allows us as humans to go from one cell as what we call a zygote, when we actually have that combination of sperm and egg, to over 75 trillion cells when we reach our physical maturation, which many of you are actually very close to your physical maturation point. In addition, it is the process of the cell cycle which allows us to replace old and damaged cells. So you can actually see here on your notes, I have this picture here of the cell cycle itself. This whole big purple area here with G1, S, and G2, that is interphase. You can see that most of the life of the cell in terms of time is in this interphase. And then mitosis and cytokinesis is this other quarter. And some of our cells go through that process while some do not. And you can also see here that the process of mitosis, this M phase, actually overlaps with the process of cytokinesis. They are actually related. Now, we're not going to go into very much detail on this because you've already had this in biology. But I do want to kind of just refresh your memory a little bit about interphase. Remember, this is the longest phase of the cell cycle where we get normal cell functioning. If I were actually to look at a cell that's in interphase underneath a microscope, it would look like it's just sitting there, like it's not doing anything. And that's not exactly true. It is very, very busy, but to our observations, it doesn't look like it's doing anything. This is a period of cell growth, and also the period during which we will replicate or copy our DNA. This is the point where most of our mutations within our cells actually occurs during that replication process. Interphase is also the time during which the cell is going to prepare for division, because once it's actually replicated its DNA, the cell is committed to undergoing cell division or mitosis and cytokinesis. So how does cancer fit into this? Well, what happens with cancer is that the controls that help to keep the cells within the interphase, that resting state, actually fail. So instead of having this nice long interphase period, the growth period actually gets shortened, sometimes quite a bit. Sometimes it will finish dividing and go right into a new division with no growth period at all. What happens is, with this sort of cycle, the number of cell divisions quickly outpace the cell death. So instead of just simply replacing cells that have died, we're actually producing an overabundance of cells. What this does is it creates a tumor. A tumor is defined as a mass of cells that grow and divide abnormally. So many of these cells do not function properly either, and that is also a big issue with these cancerous cells. Not only are they dividing abnormally in terms of their pace of division, but they're also not functioning properly either. So you probably have heard of a tumor. What doctors will do is they will actually go in and take a biopsy, which basically means they go and they take a sample of the tissue from within the tumor. And based on what they find there, they're going to make some diagnoses. If they come back and they say it's benign, that it's a benign tumor, what that means is they have found that the abnormal cells are contained within a capsule. So it's almost like a fortress wall that holds those abnormally dividing cells within a specific area. This type of tumor is actually good news because it's rarely life-threatening, and doctors actually usually leave these in place unless they are disturbing the tissue function of the surrounding tissue. That's about the only time that they will actually go in and surgically remove those. However, there's also another diagnosis, and a word you don't want to hear, and that is malignant. If you have a malignant tumor, that means that the cells not only are dividing abnormally, but they're not responding to any sort of control mechanism at all. Some of the benign tumor cells usually do. We can control them with medication. Malignant cells won't. In addition, they have actually broken out of the capsule. So now that they are outside of this containment chamber, so to speak, they actually spread out to the surrounding tissue, which is what we call invasion. So by biopsying the tumor and also looking at different images like an MRI, a CAT scan, whatever, doctors can actually put these two pieces together and make a diagnosis. They usually send the cell samples off to somebody called a pathologist or an oncologist. Oncology is the study of cancer. And so the oncologist usually will make the call as to whether or not the cells are actually abnormally dividing. And then from there, based on the other information, they will make the determination if it's benign or malignant. The key is malignant cells lose the characteristics of the cell type that they once were. So the cells inside, this tumor, let's say it started off as a skin cell. They don't look or function like skin cells anymore. They don't look or function like muscle cells anymore or nerve cells anymore. So that's the problem. And once they become this type of malignant cell and they start spreading, sometimes it's really hard to determine what type of cell they originally were. If that invasion makes other tumors appear, in other words, secondary tumors, this is the process of metastasis. And at this point, the spread is actually very difficult to control. So when we talk about cancer, what we're actually talking about is the illness that results because of the effects of the malignant cells. These cells, these tumors, especially the malignant ones, are very metabolically active. They basically hijack your blood supply. They actually cause blood vessels to come and give them a really rich supply of blood, so they have all the nutrients that they need, and their waste products are being removed. So they hijack those things from the healthy cells, oxygen, nutrients, waste removal, all of that kind of stuff. And it actually can really impair the functioning of those healthy cells. This increased blood supply, like I said, gives the nutrients, which leads to the upward arrow means increase. So you get more tumor growth and you get even more metastasis. And like I said, this metastasizing means it can really be anywhere in a body. You can start off with, let's say, a tumor of the ovary, and it can spread to the lungs, it can spread to the spinal cord, it can spread to the brain, it can spread to the colon. This is something that once it metastasizes, it can be very, very difficult to control. Basically what happens is those tumors, those malignant tumors, the cells kind of slough off. They don't like staying attached to the tumor, and they can actually break free into the bloodstream. And once they've hooked up with that highway within the superhighway, so to speak, within the body, they can travel anywhere. And wherever they land and decide that, hey, this is a good place to stop, they start growing again and forming new tumors. As tumors grow in size, that can actually impair or decrease the functioning of the organs, because what happens is those tumors start to compete for both space and resources with the normal cells. So they literally physically crush them, or they starve them. So we get cell death happening because of this. And if you kill too many of the cells within an organ, then that organ shuts down, and you lead to some additional problems. And this is what actually happens with cancer. It's not the actual cancer that cancer is the disease. It's not the actual malignant cells that cause an issue. What it is that they compromise the ability for our healthy cells to function properly. So what ends up happening is our homeostasis gets disrupted in such a way that we can't restore it. Now, in the next section, we will start talking about the cell membrane as well as the transport mechanisms of the cell membrane.